This is the sliding compound miter saw. It slides to cut about a 12-inch piece of lumber. It slides on these back guide rails back here. It moves forward and back. The compound miter means that the head can tilt and the table can angle, and we can cut a compound joint where there might be two angles at one time. The saw can be locked so that it does not slide on the rails. That lock can be found on the back side of the machine. If you need to lock the saw from sliding on the rails, you don't want it to move while you're cutting, there's a little adjustment back here. You turn this knob until it gets snug, and then the machine will not move. You put it in its desired location, tighten it up, and then you could cut without having the saw move on the slide rails. To get the base of the machine back at 90 degrees to the fence, we have a little lever down here that may be locked down. You may need to lift that up. And then inside that lever, towards this yellow track, there's a little button you push in, and you can slide it back to where the little indicator says it's at 0. It should lock into place. When you get it to your desired angle, you can push that little lever down and it will be locked into place and not move on you. If you want to tilt the head of the saw for making compound joints, we have to first loosen the handle on the back. Then you have to loosen the locking mechanism. There's a symbol that shows that the saw is unlocked. And now you can pivot the head either direction. To get the saw back to the 90-degree spot, you turn the locking mechanism back into the lock position, and it will lock into place back at 90 degrees. We then tighten up the handle so it doesn't move on us, and we are ready to use the saw again for a 90-degree cut. If you were going to use this saw and tilt the head, we need to make sure these pieces of the fence get moved out of the way so that we do not cut the metal with this saw. This saw is designed specifically for wood. We use the sliding compound miter saw for rough cuts and for finish cuts. Our rough cuts would be when we grab a piece of lumber from upstairs. It may not have a straight edge, but we're going to rough cut it to a size that's bigger than our finish size so that we can work it down and get everything squared up. One thing we need to make sure when we're using the sliding compound miter saw is that when our stock is up against the fence, if our blade is going to cut through this material and have scrap on one side and our good piece on the other, we need to make sure that the stock is touching the fence on both sides of the blade. It should be a nice tight fit up against the fence. If the material is not tight up against the fence, you may need to turn the lumber over so that it is touching the fence on both sides of the blade. This will help prevent kickback. If the material is not tight against the fence, it will cause kickback. This is what it looks like when the stock is touching on both sides of the fence. This piece would not be touching on both sides of the fence since there is a gap along the fence. When we cut with the sliding compound miter saw, we use a saw in this motion. We pull the saw out, we start the blade, push it down into the lumber, slowly bring it back across the lumber, wait for the machine to stop before you lift it back up, and that is your stroke. Out, down, in, and then back up. We need to make sure that we're following the 4-inch margin of safety. There are some little warning signs and indicators on the saw showing you where not to put your hands. Don't put your hands between these two lines. When you're using the saw, Do not cross your arms, keep them straight out in front of you. This would be the correct way. To cross your arms would be to have them the other way, where your arms are kind of going to the opposite side of your body. Do not cross your arms, keep them in front of you. When we're cutting multiple pieces, we want to set our stops so that we have all of our pieces the exact same size. When you're cutting multiple pieces, make sure that you set the stop. On this machine, the stops are these support pieces. These support pieces can have this little black bar fold up, and now we can butt our pieces up to that lumber and use that as our stop for cutting multiple pieces. To adjust it, there's just a little screw on the bottom. You loosen with your thumb and your fingers, and you slide it out to your desired location and tighten it back up. If we look at the other end, this stop is already moved all the way out to the end of the machine, out to the end of the supports. If we need it longer for supporting lumber or for a longer stop, we loosen the little screw, hand screw on the back, and we can slide this out to support our lumber as far as it will go. We can lock it into place again, and now we have a long support or a long stop. Before you use this machine or any other machine in the shop, you need to read the warnings and the owner's manual. You should always read the warning labels and owner's manual before using any machine in the shop. There are several warning labels on this machine, one on the fence and one on the top of the motor. Reading the warning labels during this demonstration does not count as reading the warning labels. You need to reread the warning labels before each use of the machine. Before you use the machine, make sure you open the blast gate. There's a blast gate located on the wall here. Open that up to suck out all of that fine dust that the machine will shoot out the back side. Now we're ready to use the saw. We grab the handle, and all you have to do is squeeze it, and the machine will start. There's a little trigger inside to start that machine. Again, we don't cross our arms. We keep our arms straight in front of us. We start the machine and make our cut in the correct stroke, which was out, down, in, and then up. Remember that you need to wait for the machine to stop before you bring it back up out of the cut. When you move the scrap out of the way, use your lumber to push it out of the safety zone, and then you can pick it up with your hand. With your scrap pieces, make sure you throw them in the trash. Do not leave them laying on the machine. Keep your fingers at least 4 inches from the blade or further. Make sure your loose clothes are tucked in. Long hair is pulled back. It's not a race while you're cutting. Make sure you do a nice, consistent speed so that you get a nice cut. If you go too fast, it tears out the fibers of the wood. If you go too slow, it will burn the wood. You need to find a medium pace. Never remove the guard. The guard will move itself out of the way when you cut. You should never pull it back to start a cut or have it tied back when you're making cuts. It should always be in place. Make sure your lumber stays tight against the table and tight against the fence. You don't want your workpiece sitting up off the table, and you want to make sure that it is tight against the fence, that there's no gaps along the fence. Make sure when you're cutting you keep your stock tight against the fence, that it does not come away from the fence on you. That's the best way to prevent kickback, is to make sure that it is tight against the fence. When you're done using the machine, grab the hand broom and brush off the machine so that it's clean for the next person to use. If you've created a lot of dust on the floor, make sure you grab a broom and sweep that up as well. If you come up to the saw and it's down in this locked position, to get it out of the locked position, you put your hand on the handle pushing down and pull out on the little silver knob under the motor. This is on the left side of the machine. Pull it out, let it back up. If you do not know how to use this machine or any other machine in the shop, please ask for help.